Welcome to Lead with Hope with Brandy Kelly, the podcast where we explore the power of hope, leadership, and resilience in today's world. Each week, we'll bring you stories, insights, and actionable advice from leaders, innovators, and change makers. So let's dive in and discover how you can lead with hope.
Good morning, everyone. Today on the podcast, I have Charles Williams. Charles is an accomplished educator, speaker, and consultant. As a school leader in Chicago and founder of CW Consulting Educational Services, Charles draws on over 2 decades of experience to help schools, educators, and leaders navigate complex challenges in education. Welcome to the podcast, Charles.
Brandy, thank you for having me. So excited to be here today.
Yes, it's great to start the day off with you. And I'm just excited to hear about your story. I want you to tell the listeners who you are, why you became an educator, and a little bit about your educational journey.
Yeah, so I appreciate, again, the opportunity. I love this question because a lot of times, as a school leader, I have brand new teachers come into my office and we're having conversations and they ask, like, how did you end up here? Mm-hmm. And I know they're waiting for that story of inspiration. And, my response is this was not where I wanted to be. And they're like, wait, what? I had no intention of being an educator by any capacity. But my grandmother for years told me, you're going to be an educator. You're going to be an educator. So my very, very first job actually was an aide. I was in 8th grade helping out at a summer school program with, a former teacher of mine. And so it was nice to be in that space. But I never wanted to do this full time. And I really fell into it out of practicality. When I graduated from my undergrad, I actually had a degree in communications and English. I had 2 job offers on the table. One was a temporary brand new position that was kind of we'll see what that does in 6 months. And the other one was doing PR at the school district where I had graduated from. And at the time, I was a single dad with 2 little girls. So I was temporary, maybe job or full-time actual job. So I went the practical route and just fell in love with doing this work. I was asked to help out in a classroom, just absolutely fell in love with it. Ended up going back to school, and then my trajectory just took off. So I was in the classroom for about 6 years. Was asked to be an assistant principal. So I had served in a quasi-admin space for a bit. And our assistant principal was sick. So they said, hey, can you step in for her until she comes back? I said, sure. She did not come back. She was still okay. She just decided, to take that as time to leave. So I became the assistant principal. The following year, I became a principal. So I went from teacher AP to principal, back-to-back years. And then sat in the principal role for just about a decade. And I've recently transitioned back into an assistant principal role, which I know some people are wait, why did you go back? But about 5 years ago, I started my consulting company, and it has really taken off. And it's really hard to lead a school and be traveling around the country and working with other organizations and districts. So I stepped back into an AP role, which allows me some flexibility. But it has been an incredible journey covering grades K through 12, working in a bilingual space, working in mainstream spaces. So really just running the entire gamut of what one would consider the educational space.
Yeah, that is intriguing. And it's interesting that you didn't plan to start out in education. You started out as a teaching assistant, essentially, and then have just come up the ranks. I have to ask, though, a lot of times we talk about this and we really highlight the educational journey part, but you talked about your girls, you talked about being a single dad. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your daughters, if you don't mind. Where are they at right now? And
yes. So my wife and I, we have 5 girls. We're like the Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
So she has 3, I have 2. So the baby is Sierra. She's 21 now. I know it may not look like it, but she's 21, and she's in New York. She's attending the Culinary Institute of America, and she actually graduates in April. So very excited for that. She did her associates. Typically, it's a 2-year program, but they also have a 4-year where you could learn like how to manage a restaurant and things like that. So she stuck on, and so she will graduate in April with her bachelor's. Her sister, Annalise, she's down in Atlanta. So she's attending SCAD, which is the Savannah College of Art and Design. So she's pursuing this concept of sustainable fashion, which she explained to me, in our world today, you have places where, you buy stuff really, really cheap, but it's bad material, it's bad for the environment. But, people love it because you can get a dress for $5. So she says, how can we create wonderful, affordable products, but also make it good for the environment?
Wow.
Yeah, and then we have the other three, Sunny, Melinda, and Jackie. Jackie, my wife's oldest, who made us grandparents. We have a 7-year-old grandson as well.
Okay. I asked that question, and I see you light up when you talk about your kids, and I feel the same way. I'm going to borrow your line. I'm a Nana. I know I don't look like a Nana, but
No, not at all.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to agree with me on that. But our families are the most important part of who we are. And like I said, I see you light up when you talk about them. So that's a good place to start. Because in education and in the educational space, I know the reason that you're doing the work you're doing with the consulting firm. And I believe we need hope in education now more than ever. And in my mind, hope is not just wishful thinking, it's actions we take, it's things that we do, it's habits that we engage in to help ourselves and others reach their fullest potential. So tell me, what actions or habits are you consistently taking right now?
So one of my good friends, Michael McWilliams, who co-authored a book with me, we used to co-host a show together, but he talked about this concept of being the lead learner. And we oftentimes talked about the idea that when leaders become leaders, unfortunately, there's this mindset of, I am now the expert. And, I don't need to worry about that anymore. I have all the understanding and knowledge that I need in order to succeed. And so we talk about this idea of saying, we can never, ever be done growing and learning. Hence the reason for my model of learn, grow, lead. And so always finding ways to figure out, how can I learn more? How can I become a better version of who I am? And so one of the reasons, like how you and I met, we're at conferences, and I don't just go to present, but I'm sitting in sessions and I'm learning and growing from my peers and my colleagues. And so I think that has helped me to say, I have these ideas, but making sure that I'm leaning into them, making sure that I'm networking with individuals so that way I can build up that space so we could all benefit one another. And I love the fact, like you got the Edu Crew shirt on, right? It's like, that is what this is all about. It's how do we do this work together? So, what is that phrase? Rising tides lifts all ships, right?
Oh, yes. I love that. Yeah. And I agree that we are better together. And I think that concept of lead learner is something that we all need to lean into, because many times when you talk about people who have come up through the ranks, however their story unfolds, they have faced some sort of imposter syndrome. They get into the seat and they're like, okay, I'm not equipped. I'm not ready for this. But it's that idea of becoming. We are intentionally engaging in habits and practices every day to help us be the best version of ourselves and to help others become the best version of themselves as well. So I love that idea, and I fully subscribe to it, Charles. So thank you for sharing that. So how do you think that your mindset or your optimistic outlook affects the way that your story has unfolded over the years and what you're doing now in this space?
So, I used to work for a company, and I know this may land differently with some people, but I used to work for a company. It was like no excuses, just results, right? And one of the things I used to embrace on that is there's a difference between excuses and reasons. Sometimes there is a valid reason why something hasn't happened. There's a logical, reasonable reason within your control, say, this is why something has not happened. But a lot of times we lean into those excuses. We try to avoid responsibility and blame and things like that. And I think when we sit in that space, then things don't happen. And so I try to sit on that other side of saying, like you mentioned, right? I've come from these places. I've come from these struggles. We've come through these areas of that adversity, but we're still here, right? And so there's always a way. We just have to figure that thing out. And I just think it's sitting in that space of knowing maybe it wasn't the way that we had originally planned, right? And maybe it's something that we will never be able to accomplish, but looking at it through that logical space as opposed to just saying, I'm going to make up an excuse because I'm it's hard, or I'm struggling, or I'm afraid of failure. I oftentimes had conversations with my students. I mentioned, being a single dad. The thing that I didn't mention was that I became a dad at 18, right? Like I had to make some very hard choices at that point. Tell my students about how I grew up, and I didn't have money. We went shopping at secondhand stores and, things like that. And so, they look at me and they're like, but you don't look like that. I said, no, right? But we can make excuses. We can make all the excuses in the world as to why we're not going to get to the goal or the destination that we want. Or we could say, hey, here's a reason that it might be hard, but how can I figure out how to overcome that thing? And when you shift that mindset, right, almost nothing is impossible to achieve. You just got to figure out, how do I overcome that obstacle?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I often talk about the fact that what you focus on is what you grow. Mm-hmm. So if you focus on the adversity and you focus on the hardship and you focus on all of the reasons why this isn't going to work, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what you're going to attract. I have a friend, Lori Hopkins, who talks about the law of attraction. And she says that, that same idea, you attract the energy you put out in the world. And I couldn't agree with that more. When my brother Brandon drowned, my mom, she really, really struggled, as you can imagine, as a parent losing a child. But one of the things that really gave her hope during that hard time was a scripture verse, Romans 8:28, all things work together for good. And that's kind of what she clung to. And ironically, she gifted me with that. That's one of my favorite quotes in the Bible. And I really think that is why I've overcome some of the hard things that I've faced in my life. And that's one of the things that has really spurred me on to design or to create this Lead with Hope construct, so that in this ed space and to the greater world too, to other industries and professions, I'm sure it can help as well. But just that idea that we have a choice, and whatever choice we make, that's the attitude, the outlook, the mindset that we can have, and you're going to attract what you put out into this world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for you, speaking of that, I think sometimes we develop our purpose through this adversity, as I was just talking about with my situation. For you, what would you say is your purpose in this life, and how do you feel that with passion?
Yeah, so I think my purpose, and I've mentioned this, in a few different spaces, and I think it's important to continue to sharing this, is that, I oftentimes hear speakers or individuals talk about how hard school was, or how they were always in trouble, and they're like, I'm here to change that. And I was like, that wasn't my experience. Like, school was phenomenal for me. Like I always say, I was the Troy Bolton of school. Mm-hmm. Like I was a scholar. I graduated in the top 10. I was towards the top of my class, all honors. I was in all the sports, played football, wrestled, ran track. I was in all the clubs and organizations. I did all the things, Brandy. Mm-hmm. And so school was a great experience for me. And I used to pride myself on that. I used to walk around with a badge of honor, like that I was an amazing individual because of how well I did at school. Mm-hmm. And then when I became an educator, what I recognized and realized was it was because school was designed for me, right? The traditional model of school was designed for students like me. So of course I was going to excel at it because I was in a perfect fit for me. Unfortunately, not all of our students are built for the traditional model of schools. And I started reflecting back on my experience and those who weren't so successful. I thought about my brother. I thought about some of my peers who were no different than me, were academically gifted than me, right? They just learned differently. Mm-hmm. And they struggled and struggled and struggled in school. And what I recognized, I said, you know what, I have to do something different as an educator. And I started doing things differently so that way I could make sure that every single one of my students would experience success. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was leaning into that equity work that I believe so passionately in today. And so as I've gone through my educational journey, that is what has really driven me, this idea of saying there should be no student, regardless of their situation, that comes out of an educational space saying, I didn't get the tools that I need to be successful. I didn't have access to the opportunities that I needed to be successful, right? And so that has been my passion and my purpose of saying, I'm going to dismantle, right, these archaic systems that perpetuate these inequities and saying, how can we make sure that every single student walks out to say, school was amazing, right? I had a great experience. Not only did I have a great time there, but I am now equipped with the tools and resources that I need to go off and pursue whatever it is that I'm going to pursue beyond school, but I can go ahead and do those things. And unfortunately, we have this very narrow model that hits this very narrow group of students, and you have all these on the outside. And so my goal in the work that I do is to try to widen those margins.
Yeah, equity and access. Yeah, that is so needed and so powerful. And as an innovator, as a change maker, as an educator, is there any adversity or trauma or tragedy that you would point to that really equipped you to do this work?
So, I think one of the things, I think these are just realizations. So I posted not too long ago on my Twitter, that I lost another student. This marks student number 7. And I remember not too long ago, going to prom, and my students were, they were being silly, they were being themselves, but the amount of time and energy and effort that was put into prom.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought to myself, I'm like, why are we doing this? Why are you doing so much for prom? Why are you making this such a big deal when, there are other things that you should probably be planning for, right? That money you spent on that limo probably could have went somewhere else, right? Like all of these things. And one of the students mentioned to me in conversation that how many of them didn't know if they were even going to make it to prom, right? Considering witnessing the passing of their peers and, friends and family, like to celebrate those milestones. And it was kind of an eye-opening aha moment for me. Right, that when we talk about adversity, we oftentimes think about these kind of like things later on in life, or but the reality is that many of our students, are experiencing adversity in ways that we never have, that maybe we never will. And I run a workshop now, this idea about like resilience, because what we talk about is when they're experiencing this adversity, we just expect almost like a bounce back. Like, all right, sorry that happened. Like, let's get back on track because we got things to do. And then our students aren't okay. Like, I don't know about you or somebody watching or listening to this, but I can tell you that our students, they're not okay because this is what they've been conditioned to do, of just kind of bouncing back, right? And so the idea is, instead of saying, how do I create spaces to where when adversity presents itself, as it inevitably will, that I'm prepared for those, right? And so it's one of the things that over time I've developed, and I've learned that from my students, to say our old model, because I was guilty of that, our old model wasn't working. And so we've developed this new, like a champ framework, because like we got to be resilience champs, and saying like, how do we actually proactively build up the tools, the skills and the strategies, so that way when adversity hits, I'm equipped to actually handle that and not just crumble and fall apart or bounce back to where I'm pretending to be, put on that mask, put on that facade, but then be dying inside while I'm putting on a show for everybody else.
Yeah. And with purpose, passion, and perseverance, some people call that grit. And in our world today, not everyone has that grittiness that you need to be successful in life. And you raise a really important point, because when you think about the world that we were raised in and the world that our students are being raised in, it's completely different. There might be similarities, but there are so many differences. And I think about just the daily intake of social media and technology and everything that they're consuming as far as communication every day. And sometimes that's traumatic in and of itself. And so thinking about that champ idea, thinking about that resilience idea that you were just talking about, are there any specific skills that you would point our listeners to really engage in to help equip our students in this difficult landscape?
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'll just,
Yeah.
so the idea of champ is, it's a simple idea. C stands for connection, just building those connections. So that way, when I am struggling, I'm not alone. I have others around me. H is for that healthy thinking, right? And this idea of how do I shift my mindset, right? From these deficit kind of beating myself up, right? And so that way it becomes a habit. So when adversity strikes, I'm already accustomed to positive thinking and not in these dark spaces. A comes from awareness, and awareness is a double piece. One, am I aware of how I'm feeling and how I'm showing up? And then am I also aware of the tools that are accessible to me so that way I could address those things that are popping up? M stands for meaning. Am I finding purpose, like we've just talked about? Am I finding purpose in the things that I'm doing? Do I understand where this is going to lead? Am I doing it with intention? And then the last one is P, is perseverance, of taking those first pieces and saying, when it gets tough, because it's easy to build those when things are good, right? It's very, very easy. But when things become hard, when adversity strikes, am I going to lean into those skills and those strategies to get me through those things, right? And I think it's when we are equipped, when we're okay, is when we can actually build that on, because so often we wait for tragedy to strike and then we try to do those things, and people are like, I'm not okay right now. I can't build those things. We know about how the brain processes, how the brain thinks. Like I biologically cannot do those things right now. Right. But that's when we try to, and then we give some time, right? We have these superficial time frames of saying, okay, right, this amount of time has passed. Let's get back into it. And they're like, well, we did all the things. They should be good. And it's like, no, they're not.
Yeah, that really resonates with me because, as you know, the Lead with Hope framework is about self-reflection to build self-awareness and self-efficacy. And our two acronyms, they really mirror each other and complement each other. So thank you for sharing that. I love that. The last letter in my acronym is E, for excellence. And I believe that our students, our teachers, our staff, they all deserve excellence. So when you think about that, how do you inspire? Well, first of all, why don't you tell us how do you define excellence, Charles?
I'm glad you asked. So there's a quote, a comment, and I don't remember where it came from, but it was something that we used to share. So when I was a principal at the K through 8 building, we would say this, right? Good, better, best. Never let it rest until my good is better and my better is best. Right. And there was this idea of excellence isn't the striving for perfection, but it's just striving to become better. Right. I'm going to be better today than I was yesterday. I'm going to be better this week than I was last week. I'm going to be better this month than I was last month. I'm going to be better this year than I was last year. And that's all. Can I make incremental gains just to continue bettering myself in whatever aspect, whatever way that means? And to me, if you can continue to do that, that's excellence. Right? It's this idea of just continuously growing.
Oh, 100% agree with you. 100%. And I also think that those that we love and that we have connection with, we hold them accountable. And that is so hard for many of us, especially our early administrators, our early leaders in school administration, thinking that, people are going to get upset with you, or that they're not going to value what you're bringing to the table, and they just want to close their door and teach, right? But if we love people, just like our children, we started off this conversation talking about our children and our grandchildren. Can you imagine not holding them accountable if they make a mistake? We need to do that. We need to have those courageous conversations in the pursuit of excellence to help people get incrementally better day after day after day.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if you know him, Hotep Benzo. He's in the speaking circuits with us.
Okay.
But one of the things he talked about was accountability is love. And
Mm.
I won't forget that phrase, because at first I was like, I don't know. And then as I've sat on it, I'm like, this is absolutely right. Right. And I've shared it with my staff. I've shared it with my students. Like, I'm holding you accountable because I care about you, because I love you, because I want to see you grow. If I didn't care, I'd be like, whatever. Right. But so, yeah.
Yeah, it's so that's a powerful quote, and I love the quote that you started this segment with, as far as that continuous improvement idea around excellence. So I hope you'll share that with me later. Maybe send me an email or something so I can post that. I want to post that in my office to continually come back to that. It's a beautiful quote. It's a beautiful quote. So as we wrap up this episode of the Lead with Hope podcast, Charles, for the listeners that want to get in touch with you, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm everywhere, so they can find me. I used to joke, because my students would be like, "I'm going to Google you." This is like when Google was first becoming a thing. I was like, "Go ahead, right?"
Yeah.
Do you know how common the name Charles Williams is? Now I'm Googleable, so that's always fun. But I'm on the social medias, at _CW Consulting. I used to be upset about the underscore, because there's somebody out there without it and they don't use it.
Yeah.
But it's become part of what I do now. So whatever. So it's _CW Consulting. You could go to the website. You could connect with me, email me, shoot me a message. I am extremely approachable. I'm extremely contactable. So whether it's just simply a question, you want to bounce an idea off, or if you want to work with me at some point, feel free to reach out. I'd be more than happy to connect. Like Brandy has on her shirt, the Edu Crew. I'm always looking for individuals that I can learn and grow from, but that I could also feed back into. So feel free to reach out.
Yes. And, I'm wondering too, Charles, as we end here, what is something that you're doing right now that you're super passionate about? Any projects in the works?
So yeah, I've got a few gigs already booked for next year, but I am working on this thing. I feel bad because I have a few books in the process. I'm really like, I'll start one and then like I get another idea and I start another one. One of them is this idea around professional development. And as you know, right, when we go to conferences, when we have things, a lot of times it's back to back to back, different ideas. And if I'm a learner in that space, it's great because I'm getting all of these great ideas, but it's also, there's a lot of stuff. I don't know how much time I have to process or apply. And so I have the great fortune of now doing some pre-conference workshops where we have time together. It's not 45 minutes, but it's a 3-hour session to say, let's dive deep. Let's take this concept and apply it to that work. And so looking into this new approach in PD to say, it's not just a quick sit and get, it's not these back-to-back sessions, but to really dive deep with some of the like biggest minds and innovative thinkers within our educational spaces of saying, how can I learn this concept, but not only just learn it, but how can I take it and apply it to myself? So that way, as I'm walking away, I actually have tools and strategies and resources that make sense to me and my space now. So we're playing around with that a little bit. We'll see what happens. So if just be on the lookout. If something comes out down the way, then you'll know. But yeah,
that's cool. And when we met in person at the IPA conference, that was one of the things you were talking about being passionate about, is just thinking about how we as adults learn and making that PD meaningful for people. And I also love the fact that you are taking the time, whether you're in your school or at conferences or no matter where you're at, to make connections too. I really appreciate that, Charles. And I thank you for coming on today. The CHAMP acronym, you truly embody that. And as we know, you have to model it and show people how to live it, and then they can mirror that. And thank you for doing that and being in this space. And again, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Have a great day.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at teachbetter.com/podcasts, and we'll see you at the next episode.